Really, when we did it in 2013, I honestly thought it was just going to be kind of a shakedown run where we would see how fast we could go and then figure out what we've got to fix in order to have a shot at actually setting the record. But in fact, everything that we really couldn't control, the traffic, construction, accidents, police patrolling, weather, everything just went perfectly.
You finished in California. I mean, did you know that you had, what point did you think, hey, we're probably going to break this, or we've got a shot?
Well, so when we were coming through St. Louis, and we saw that the GPS's estimated time was right where we needed to be to set the record. And the GPS is assuming that we're going to drive the speed limit. So we had gone so fast in that first leg that we knew that we were well on track to do it. But when we got to Oklahoma City, it was going to be 30 hours if we averaged the speed limit the rest of the way. And so, I mean, it was all just mind-blowing, but you feel like you're banking time for an eventual bad outcome. Whether you get pulled over or have a flat tire or something else that we've planned to deal with, you just have some more padding. We never expected not to need any of that padding.
Right. Did you think that you might get pulled over? Like, what was the worst case scenario?
Well, I mean, the worst case scenario is always that somebody makes an unsafe decision, but honestly, it's such an undramatic drive because of the attention that everyone's paying. We never played the radio. There really weren't any distractions. No one drove when they were tired. And so when you've got three people in a car wholly engaged in the task of driving, it's really undramatic. Nobody surprises you. The only time we had anything close to a close call was actually in Arizona. We were coming down from Ash Fork, and that's a tough drive because, you know, you'd think it would occur to us that at some point, if you drive due west for more than a day, you've got to plan on driving straight into the setting sun. And it's just blinding and brutal. And we hadn't really made any plans for that. And we had high, very dark sunglasses, polarized and all that, but it was still just brutal. And so when you're driving through, you're just kind of alongside a bunch of tractor trailers, and one pulled out in front of us. It was a FedEx driver. He didn't see us. It was okay. And we were approaching pretty quick. So we put two wheels off and just nicely put it back on in front of him. And it was undramatic to me. The rest of the guys freaked out a little bit, but we made it just fine. And so we lost a fog light, but beyond that, the car was
I can imagine it's slightly stressful going 130 for that kind of stretch.
It's something you feel, for sure.
Yeah. So, and what kind of GPS were you using? Because was Waze even around back then?
Waze was, but I think Waze at the time might have had about the same number of users we have in VINwiki today, about 200,000 or so. It was not anywhere near a critical mass, and now they've got millions and millions of daily active users, and so it wasn't that valuable. But there was another app called Trapster, and Trapster was actually purchased around that time by Nokia, who continued to just turn it off. But that was actually a community reporting thing, a lot like Waze, but it was just focused on cops. And it wasn't necessarily live updated because most of us had it on Blackberries rather than on iPhones. And so it had a nice little network, but what it really did was tabulate the frequency that police set up speed traps there. Because in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere, even today, Waze is not that useful. But knowing where cops like to sit, what bridges they like, and things like that, maybe what's closest to the best donut shop, that allows you to have a much better insight about what the likelihood is that around this next bend you're going to see a cop.
Right, okay. That's incredible. Do you think anybody will break your record?
People are certainly trying. I mean, I really couldn't find any evidence that anyone had made it a real, concerted effort to beat 3104 between 2007 when he announced it and 2013 when we tried. He mentioned he thought several people tried per year, but nobody was ever claiming that. Now, since 2013, I know of at least a dozen true drives in effort, and second place has been set 3 times since then. So there's 29:48 times, that's just under an hour off of ours, and then there's 30:43 and 30:53. So they're getting closer, but it takes a lot of things going right, and in each of their times, they've either hit some bad weather, had some issues with cops, or for whatever reason, not quite made it there in time.
Right. Is it something like, do you think that you do again?
Well, I have done it several times since then, but it's all been kind of a tongue-in-cheek style, either in older cars or cheaper cars or things that just weren't inherently as serious and as fast. I found out afterwards that there was kind of a forking of manifestations of modern cannonball enthusiasm. There were the guys like us that were just idiots that went out to see how fast we could do it on our own, but there were also people organizing events, and one of them was called the 2904. And I thought that was just fascinating because they were taking kind of the 24 hours of Lemons rules, which is like budget endurance car racing, and applying it to the context of cannonball. And so what they did was they set a budget, and they were originally running from New York to San Francisco because the organizer lived there and hated LA, and so they would drive along the 80 route, and they wanted to do it for $1 a mile, including buying the car, the gas, tolls, tickets, food, everything. And so $2,904 across the country. And so he contacted me after he heard about our record and was kind of pleased with obviously the advancement of the idea, and he told me about their event. And I said, you know what? That sounds like a ton of fun. I'd love to come along as long as I can kind of find something that's in the spirit of what we did here. And so I started looking for derelict AMG cars, and I ended up finding a 12-owner, 2-accident, salvage title, frame damage, airbags deployed, 02 S55 AMG on Craigslist in Las Vegas. And this woman had loaned it to her daughter to drive to Hollywood and become a famous actress, but of course the car broke down, so she didn't become famous. And so I negotiated down from $5,000 to $1,500 and got the car bought, and we spent the next year putting that together, and we won that event with a time of 32 hours and 5 minutes, which was actually faster than all the competitive times that were ever registered from 71 to 83 when they ran it in a more formal way. So that's the competitive event, New York to LA record.
Wow. So if somebody does want to try to break your record, is this something they advertise, hey, we're going to try it on this date, or just people just trying it all the time, and then when somebody does, they're like, hey, we did it?
So it's actually a pretty small community of people like me that still care about this sort of thing, and so we stay pretty close, and we'll get together and have dinner every once in a while. And so I've kind of dubbed it the fraternity of lunatics, and we kind of know when people are going to try. And it was important to me that whenever I made the phone call that said, hey Alex, I just broke your record, that it wasn't the first time he'd heard from me. So I called him, you know, every few months leading up to it, saying, you know, you told me not to tell you exactly when, but it's going to happen sometime soon. Okay. And so when I called him, he wasn't entirely shocked,
so he knew
by
you
anything
were
other than
give
the
it a
time.
shot. Okay. And how do you prove that you broke it? How does anyone prove that, you know, that we started this point and here we are, like?
Right, so there's not like a Guinness officiation of this world record. It's one of those things that you kind of have to self-report, but we used a third-party GPS tracking device, which was really kind of the most concise and clear form of proof that anyone had had, because prior to that, that stuff really wasn't available on a consumer level. I'd had tracking devices like that for the exotic car rental company that I started while I was at Georgia Tech, but putting them into this car for that kind of use was kind of outside their normal use case. And when CNN started calling to verify it, they were very uncomfortable with somehow becoming the sanctioning body of outlaw cross-country road racing. But you layer that in with obviously metadata photos and GPS screens and trip readouts and mileage updates and things like that, fuel receipts, toll receipts, all that sort of stuff to kind of corroborate and create a circumstantial, you know, compulsion.
Makes sense. So were you ever a fan of the movie, The Cannonball Run?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think you have to be.
Yeah,
but I loved it. And I mean, it's the goofiness combined with the cool cars and the hot girls and everything else you could ever want about a movie. It was utter perfection.
Did you take any tips from that movie?
You know, we talked about a lot of things. We talked about low adhesive vinyl so we could change the color of the car, like kind of like they did in Cannonball Run 2 in the opening.
Yeah.
We talked about kind of an adaptation of the ambulance idea. I actually went to a local butcher and I got some pig hearts. And I had a cooler, and I had some shirts made up that said transcon, transplant, transport, and we were going to make up some reason why these organs couldn't be flown or whatever. But as the team kind of came together, honestly, I didn't have as much confidence in my co-conspirators of keeping such a ruse up, and so we scrapped that.
Right. That's pretty clever, pretty crazy. Cool. Well, I know that you recently got a new car. You've got a bunch of cool cars, but you recently got a new Ferrari?
I did, yeah. I got a new to me, very old Ferrari that is an awful lot of fun. You want to check it out?
Yeah, let's go check that one.
So this is a 2009 Ferrari 430 Scuderia, and every time, you know, Ferrari makes several different models at a time, and they always make a mid-engine V8 car. Now it's a twin-turbo V8 car, but it's kind of their bread and butter model. But they'll run those for 4 or 5 years, and at the end of it, they'll make kind of a more track-focused version, and it kind of becomes the the road version of the race version of the original road version of the car. And so that's what this is. They just made it in 08 and 09, and there's now kind of a successor to that generation in the 458 Speciale and the 488 Pista. But to me, this is just quintessentially what a Ferrari ought to be.
Well, it's a beautiful car, Ed, and I've never driven a Ferrari.
Well, today's your lucky day.
Awesome. All right, let's go for a ride.